Can you believe it's been 15 months at the time of recording that James Vowles took over the role of team principal at the Williams Formula One outfit? The once dominating team again found itself on the decline after a glimmer of hope during the early years of the turbo hybrid era. When Dorilton Capital brought the team out, it marked the end of the family-run team founded by the late Sir Frank Williams and continued by his daughter Claire Williams. When the ex-Mercedes man's James Vowles took over the reins, there was a renewed sense of optimism and much-needed direction. But is this the case? Well, I'm Bryn Lucas, and joining me to discuss this is Jake Boxall-Legge, aka JBL, who was lucky enough to sit down with James Vowles himself at Imola just last week. First of all, JBL, great to have you on.
Thank you very much, Bryn. Yeah, it was a really good interview with James. Got a lot of insight into the team, as always, and I'm sure everybody's seen this on his various TV appearances. Very eloquent man, so I felt that I could come away learning something from him. So yeah, it was a nice sort of starter to the weekend at Imola for sure.
Well, let's learn something from you then, shall we? The challenge has been set. Before we talk about how he's getting on at Williams, I think it's probably best we paint the picture really, and you tell us what the state of the team was like before Dorilton Capital made their investments.
Yeah, as you mentioned at the top of the show, Bryn, at the start of that turbo hybrid era, Williams had sort of come into the ascendancy once again. It had a few tough years kind of in the midfield, dropped back, sort of 2011, 2012, 2013. Obviously, they did have that win from Pastor Maldonado, but that was a year where they developed a very good car and it was sort of wasted a little bit by the two drivers. 2013 was kind of what we thought would be Williams' nadir. And then after that, things started to improve. A lot of people would suggest that it was just the power of the Mercedes turbo hybrid power unit, but they beat the other Mercedes teams apart from the works team itself. So the car was clearly very good. But there was just simply a point where it couldn't maintain that sense of progression and it declined once again. And then around 2018, relying on a lot of pay drivers, it was no longer in a position where it could compete. It was just simply trying to survive in F1. And that kind of brought a sour note to the end of the Williams family's tenure in charge of the team, that it was just essentially relying on drivers, relying on, sponsors to try and bring money in. The Martini deal had, elapsed. They had their own sort of issues with another title sponsor at that time. So it was very much survival mode. And it did take until Dorilton took over for money to start being invested into the team. So it was a long road, and it just became the case that things haven't been invested into, and the team was just simply trying to build a car for the next year and go about its merry way.
Now, the article you've written on Autosport.com, which is very good, by the way, I read it when I was on the treadmill, but I wasn't. I was on the bike, the exercise bike, so I could keep fairly static while I was reading it. It was packed full of information, and one thing that really interested me was just how Dorilton invested and what they did with the investment and what James Vowles thinks about the investment that was made by them. But first of all, before we talk about what the investment was and how they went about making changes at Williams, what were James Vowles' goals when he came in as team principal at Williams?
I think the main one has been to modernise the team, obviously make it more competitive, but it's about having sort of like a sustainable level of that. And, being competitive, what metric is that? Could they just design a good car with what they have? Possibly. They could sort of stumble across one, but it's not going to be very repeatable. Obviously, and kind of as I'd mentioned, Williams had suffered from underinvestment. I think after around sort of like, those BMW years where they were very, very competitive, that's kind of where things started to dry up. That's where the kind of capital started to dry up. You had the manufacturer team, putting a lot more money into what infrastructure they had, and Williams just sort of wasn't really doing that. So yeah, it was modernise the facilities, ensure that when you are developing a car, you're not relying too much on, and this is how Vowles puts it himself, relying on contingency, which is when you build something, you're up against the time limit, testing's coming very, very soon, and you're thinking, how do we get this car out? And then you start using easier to use materials, cheaper materials, but heavier materials, and then you start to lose performance that way. So I think just basically trying to replicate the success that Mercedes had when Vowles was at the team, but also look ahead and work out, okay, where's F1 going in the next 5-10 years? How do we anticipate those trends with regards to car design and how a team works effectively? So I think those are the key sort of things that he wanted to tick off when he took over.
You mentioned the investment there. What was done by Dorilton? Because part of this, and it's in your article as well, is the state of the facilities, where they were lagging behind and what Dorilton invested in primarily. I know that there's in your article you talk about things that James said to you about, in particular, that he didn't say that the investment was made in the wrong places, but maybe made in the wrong order. So first of all, just talk us through the investment that Dorilton did, or the changes they made, and quite where James Vowles sees the mistakes being made.
Yeah, it was when he came into the team, there were several things that he didn't like the look of. He saw that, I think, particular carbon fibre manufacturing was very kind of out of date. He didn't particularly, let's say, respond too positively to that. And there was a time in, especially the first few months of his reign, he was getting to a point where he was saying, oh, this machine is out of date and it's 20 years old. This machine is out of date. The systems that we use, still using Excel spreadsheets or still using very, very old sort of proprietary software and that kind of thing. And I did kind of say to him, it sounds like I was sort of waiting for a Williams bit of kit to appear on Antiques Roadshow or something like that. And he did say, well, actually, it's not that far off of that. So it was all about, he wanted to invest in particularly sort of composites and that kind of thing. The Dorilton investment had gone quite a lot into kind of machine shop and stuff like that. But that wasn't particularly the lowest hanging fruit, let's say. Especially when it comes to what I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit, which is weight saving and things like that. If your composites facilities aren't very good, then you're just going to end up with a sort of very, very heavy car, because the way that you laminate your carbon fibre sheet, the way that you build a monocoque, the way that you build bodywork, it's just not going to be the optimum way to do it. So when he came into the team, I think that was one of the first things at the top of his list.
It's interesting. You said in the article as well that he'd said that the machine shop was still actually a pretty good machine shop, but the composites was really far behind. And when you think of a car being 75% composite materials, you can see that maybe he's right to have said it's great that they've invested the money and it's great that they tried to update things, but perhaps there should have been more of a focus on the 1%, but the many 1% that the composite materials can bring.
Yeah, definitely. And again, you're developing front wings, rear wings. You're developing the monocoques at the start of the season, and as Williams found out slightly later into the season as well. You need to have quite a quick turnaround on those parts, because you're building, ideally 5 or 6 front wings per specification, and you want to then be able to respond relatively quickly to developing a new one and ensuring that all your fixtures and fittings are what you need them to be. It's kind of stuff that we don't really think about when it comes to performance terms of an F1 car. We're just thinking, have they got upgrades for this season, and what's the time gain of these upgrades? That's kind of what we usually focus on. We don't really focus on the sort of behind closed doors aspect, because I suppose we don't really ever get to see it, but that's all a consideration. We have to think about how is the team producing a part? Is it as light as it can be? And is it as strong as it can be? And, just to sort of like loop it back, if your composites laboratory, if your composites production isn't good enough, then again, you're just sort of adding more weight into the system, and you're not developing parts, let's say, with the intricacies that modern Formula One desires.
Before we talk about his on-track performance, rather than his on-track performance, but the team's on-track performance under his stewardship, I think it's worth just kind of giving a backstory about James Vowles, his credentials, and how he got to his position. I read that he'd been at university, studied computer science. He wanted to get into Formula One. This may not be true, by the way. This is what I've read. He wanted to get into Formula One. He wrote off quite a lot of letters to different teams. Didn't really get a positive response. Some saying, look, we don't need maths, what we need are engineers, so go and retrain, get a degree in engineering, which he then did. And while he was at Cranford, he then was part of a team that won an award, a Pro Drive award. the following year, he then worked at BAR, which was under the stewardship of Mr. ProDrive himself, who was the chairman, the founder, Mr. Richards from ProDrive, but also was the team principal at BAR. So he's worked his way in that way, and he's also been seen, am I right by saying, as a decent replacement for Toto Wolff whenever it was that Toto Wolff was going to hang up his headset. So he had a focus on the future when he was at Brawn and Honda as well, but he seems like the sort of guy that can lead a ship. What is he like as a character, and what characteristics does he have that you think that help him maybe shape a team as significantly as Williams need?
I think he just has an unfailingly clear idea of what he wants to do, and he's fantastic at communicating that. Again, we see that in his media appearances. You can ask him the most difficult question on the planet and he'll have an answer for you, and it'll be sort of logical and it'll be quite thought out. I think it's fair to say that he has that clarity, and I think the people that will sort of work under him probably come away from a meeting like I did in that interview, coming away with a sense of, I know what this means, I know what XYZ means, and I sort of feel like I've sort of got that clarity. But yeah, we did speak a bit about management theory in that interview as well. We didn't go super deep into the article with it, but I thought it was an interesting chat to have, because I wanted to get his perspective of what actually running a Formula One team was like, because that wasn't something he'd done in his capacity at Mercedes. And he said, the Williams kind of family structure had still kind of prevailed a little bit, after Claire Williams left the team. Jost Capito took over the team, and I think it retained sort of that upper hierarchy structure. You don't want a team principal that's okaying every single decision that has to be made, because that just slows everything down. Formula One has been littered with car companies and manufacturers that have wanted to sort of introduce this management corporate structure of the top brass being involved in every single decision, and it just slows things down. You can't be quick enough to respond to things. See Jaguar, see Toyota, see other sort of situations like that. So what he's done is, first of all, when he joined the team, hired a load of HR people, gave everybody some degree of management training and that kind of thing. And so suddenly you've got a sort of, I guess, upper management and then middle management culture where people can make those decisions and not have to, lay everything on his desk. So it's sort of like slightly more hands-off, let's say, in that regard, but it's about creating a culture where everybody's on the same ship, so everybody knows what kind of decisions to make, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and he's been very, very successful, hasn't he, over his career, particularly Brawn and his time at Mercedes as well. How's his performance been so far? Then we are talking about his performance at Williams then. So since he's been in and taken over that role, how do we rate the team's performance?
I think rating it on this year, it's not been the season that the team wanted. That's for sure. Last year was a good year for where it had been. Obviously, straight line speed had been a really important part of that, and it had given the team, especially Montreal, Silverstone, the team chances like that to go out and score results and use Alex Albon with DRS as, he was, a brilliant defensive driver last season. And then this was another thing that we spoke about. You can do that, and you can go ahead and build a car that's really good in a straight line, and you'll be good at about 6 or 7 circuits a year. But you're not going to be good at all of them. And the calendar's so big now that you lose a huge amount of points just by not having a particularly good all-round car. So that's something they wanted to do for this season, but it's not worked quite the way that it wanted. And I think part of that has been, I guess, delays with regards to the spare chassis, which has kind of pushed things back a little bit. I'm sure it's not pushed things back a whole lot, but, resources were needed for that. You have a situation where you've got this very tight midfield. You've got a situation where, and as we'll sort of might as well touch on now, the car is currently overweight. We don't know by how much. Obviously, Williams isn't going to reduce that figure, but it did estimate that it's about 0.4, 0.5 seconds off the pace purely because of it being overweight. If we use a sort of time-tested paddock metric, that's probably 10 kilograms plus overweight, which is kind of where Alpine was at the start of the season. So there's a lot to fix, a lot to consider. It's kind of a learning experience, I guess, in some respects, because this car is very different to the previous two. It's not just a straight line speed monster. It's a car that's a little bit more of an all-rounder. It just hasn't necessarily had the chance to show it yet.
Yeah, and as you say, I mean, James Vowles isn't there to turn the ship around in 1 year. This is very much a long-term goal. So with the likes of Alex Albon signing the contract extension to 2027, surely there are enough signs to someone like Alex Albon that the team is moving in the right direction and that the future is positive for him.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a little bit of two things. I think there are positive signs for sure. And he clearly sees his future at the team, hence he wouldn't have signed. But equally, I do think it's sort of probably fair to say that there weren't going to be the options available for him for 2026 and beyond. There was that talk of the Red Bull kind of exclusivity contract, let's say. But, you know, you don't want to sign a thing where you might have a seat at the end of it or you might not. It's a bit like, rather than signing a deal, it's a bit like signing a memorandum of understanding, which isn't particularly legally binding. You know, Mercedes probably wasn't going to come in for Albon. Audi is chasing Sainz, so it didn't look like there was going to be an opportunity there. Aston Martin already sewn up, as are other teams. So the options were dwindling, to be honest. But I think he sees the way that the team is heading, and evidently wants to stay. Obviously, it wasn't a very good weekend in Imola because of the whole loose tyre thing. Very much ruined his weekend, and he was sort of doing an extended test session. But yeah, I think he sees the way things are going. He's a smart man, and I think, you know, 2 or 3 years' time, he'll be in a position where he can fight for points regularly, rather than sort of having to wait occasionally for track conditions to suit the car.
Yeah, a smart man. One that knows to stay in Formula One, you have to be able to perform, and he is performing well. It seems like he is enjoying his time at Williams, and that is also key. And he is also extremely marketable, isn't he, Alex Albon? You know, he's a marketing manager's dream, I imagine. Let's just stay with James Vowles as I turn into a croaky beast for some unknown reason, and find out what you think is going to happen in the future, 25, 26, 27, what the changes going to happen, what changes are going to happen at Williams, and also where do we expect to see Williams as we get to the end of this decade?
There's still a lot to do. Again, sort of 20 years of underinvestment it doesn't come for free. There's still, we did sort of speak about where things were with the changes he was implementing, and he did say, look, there's still stuff in the composites department that needs to change. Again, the overweightness of this year's car does suggest that as well. So work needs to be done there. They are still, haven't shaken off that famous Excel spreadsheet that tracks build yet. Again, there's more money that needs to be spent on kind of computer systems, software, that kind of thing. And ultimately getting the right people in as well, because for when you have a team that's sort of been at the bottom for the last few years, it's not that the people aren't talented or anything like that at all. But sometimes if you've been at a team and the team has sort of stayed pretty much the same structurally, you're not going to have that outside influence. And so you're sort of grasping at straws a little bit, trying to understand where everybody else is coming from with their car designs. Why not make yourself a better proposition for other engineers to want to go to, and bring their fresh ideas in? You kind of want to have a mix of both of them. Obviously, that started with the signing of Pat Fry last year. I'm sure there'll be more on the way. So I think the future's a lot brighter than it has been after the last few years. It's been a real struggle for Williams just to get off the back of the grid. I think it's probably fair to say that they are. The points table doesn't necessarily reflect that right now. But there's reason to be cheerful for sure. And I think, certainly a long-term project. Hopefully we see that bear fruit, because obviously it's a team that everybody, I think, respects, has a huge amount of history. And it would be nice to see it fighting at the front once again.
But yeah, I think we all want to see Williams back at the sharp end. Just as to whether or not it is a success yet for James Vowles, maybe it's too early to tell, but it's good to see where he currently sits and where the team is moving to and where it's been. So thanks very much to JBL, as always, for casting your eye over it. I urge you to go and read the article on Autosport.com. It's full of loads of detail, including what we've spoken about and a whole lot more. So make sure you check that out, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.